You're in this relationship with a narcissist, you've been married to this narcissist, you've been looking at it and figuring it out, and oh my God, you realize, I'm actually married to a narcissist and I don't want to be. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to get out? It's so hard to just start the process. So one of the things that I want to tell you is when you're preparing to ask a narcissist for divorce is to get your mindset in a place where you feel strong enough to be able to do that. And that might seem like a really strange place to start, but that is really where you want to start, is with your mindset. You want to believe that you can actually get free of this person. I've had many, many clients who have come into my office and who have said to me, I can't leave, or I don't know how to leave, or I don't even think I have the strength to do it. Or this other person is so powerful. You know, one of the things that narcissists do is that they have their victims believing that they're so powerful and everybody loves them and they have the whole world under control. And so no matter what you do, you can't win. There's no way that you're going to be able to get out of this thing. That's what they want you to believe. That is so not true. I've helped people out of the worst situations, the deepest holes, the darkest places. So the first thing I want you to do is work on your mindset. Just understand that you can do this. And if you want to know more about having a winning mindset, check out my interviews, part 1 and part 2, with Mark Raffin, who is the negotiation ninja, and he talks all about how to have a winning mindset. Just know that 80% of a negotiation is won before you even walk into a room. And understanding that you can win is just 50% of that 80%. So just understand that you can win and you can get out and you can escape, and it will be okay, and you will have a new life and you will be all right on the other side. So that's number 1, is to have a winning mindset. It doesn't even have to be winning at the beginning. Just understand that you can do it. So number 2, before you even ask that narcissist for a divorce, is have a plan in place. Make sure that you have figured out where you're going to live, how you're going to serve this person. Are you going to hire a lawyer? Are you not going to hire a lawyer? All these things are going to be in place before you ask that narcissist for a divorce, because when you go to ask the narcissist for divorce, you may trigger their narcissistic injury and their rage, and things might start happening. And before it goes spinning out of control, you want to be able to put all these pieces in place that will allow you to have control over the situation when you ask that narcissist for that divorce. And if you're so ready to divorce that narcissist, give me a let's roll in the comments. The next thing you need to remember when you are going to ask a narcissist for divorce is that you're going into now the discard phase of a narcissistic relationship. And if you want to know more about the discard phase, check out my video on the discard phase of a relationship. Because remember, you have your love bomb, you have your devalue, and then you have your discard. When you go into the discard phase of a narcissistic relationship, regardless of whether or not you are doing the discarding or that other person is doing the discarding, it triggers their rage. And so you need to be able to plan for how it's going to go when you go ahead and ask this person for divorce. So understand that and anticipate that their rage could come out, and plan for that accordingly. So where are you going to be? Is it going to be a place where you're alone? Are your kids going to be around? Are you going to be at someone else's house? Are you going to be sitting at Starbucks? I once had a client who decided to ask his spouse for divorce in their marriage counseling office. And I actually thought that was a good idea. But he wanted to try to control the process, and they had been going to marriage counseling. And so he decided to tell her that he was going to be asking for divorce in marriage counseling. But it completely backfired on him, because he told her that she was going to be served later that day, and their marriage counseling was at noon or something. So he goes back to work and she goes home, and he gets home at 6 o'clock that night thinking that she's going to be home and that she will have been served. Well, guess what? She leaves a note saying, I went to this other place, which was like an hour away. So we go to serve her at that place that was like an hour away. Well, we come to find out later that she had gotten in her car with her dogs. She drove straight to another state where they had another home. She went and hired some celebrity divorce attorney, big time heavy hitter, and ended up filing in that other state first, and then serving him first. So we ended up having to litigate the case in another state before we could even get to the merits of the case in our state. So we basically had to get that other case dismissed, which we were able to do, but it cost him lots and lots of money to do it before we could even get back to our state and start the regular divorce process. It really backfired on him. So one of the things that I would suggest to you when you're planning on how to ask this narcissist for a divorce is to anticipate what is it that you think that they're going to do when you ask them for a divorce. Sometimes the better thing to do is just to go ahead and serve them. Have everything planned, have everything ready to go. You've moved your stuff out, maybe when the person is at work, or maybe in the middle of the night. I had another client who once her husband was sleeping, she packed up all the stuff and slipped out in the middle of the night. He woke up in the morning and she was gone. We were just able to serve him at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that's how he got told that she wanted a divorce. Sometimes the best way to ask a narcissist for divorce is not to ask them, just to let them know that you want a divorce because they've got served with divorce papers. And that way you don't have to deal with telling them, and you don't have to deal with being there when their rage is triggered and they might go crazy. Some people don't like to do it that way because they feel like, oh, that's not the nice way, or I want to give them a chance to respond, or I don't want to hurt their feelings or whatever. But if you're dealing with a true narcissist, understand that that narcissist doesn't have that same feeling for you. They don't have that same sense of empathy, and you have to do what you have to do in order to protect yourself. And if you've got minor children, then you need to protect them too. You should also check out my video on before leaving a narcissist. Watch this, because I go into a lot of these details and even a little bit more. But you can also just tell them, I'm leaving, and this is how it's going to go down, and I'm not coming back, and nothing you can say will make me come back. And just say it very calmly, and say it without emotion. And I would recommend that you say it where you're not completely alone, depending on the type of narcissist that you're dealing with. You don't want anything you say to be twisted in a certain way. So, my client's idea of doing it in marriage counseling wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But, if you are going to do that, then maybe the process server is waiting for them in the parking lot, like when they go get to their car, something like that, so that they don't have a chance to double cross the way my client's wife did to him. But, say it without emotion, say it resolutely, be ready. You've got your mindset ready. If they sense one little piece of waffling in you, they're going to use that to their advantage and try to hoover you and love bomb you right back into your life and try to gain control back over you again. Those are my suggestions on how to ask a narcissist for divorce.
So narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder that affects so many people, and it's a stealth kind of personality disorder that most people don't even understand or see until the evil part of it arrives. These people that have this have no sense of value of other people. They really don't hold anything of value to anybody. They are abusive, and they don't start out that way. They start out extremely charming. They start out where they are sudden soulmates with someone, and most of the time while they're in a relationship, their neighbors, their friends, their coworkers will never see the signs that they are being abusive at home.
Now, Tracy, I know you mentioned on your website and in your podcast that you yourself are a survivor of several relationships with narcissists. And this is what's led you to be so passionate about educating people on the topic. Would you mind sharing a little bit of your personal story? Because I think it will sound familiar to many of our listeners.
Sure. I did not know what narcissistic personality disorder was, or that there were people out there that were this crazy. And yet, when I learned about it because I had been in a marriage, and my divorce was just like the things that kept getting thrown at me, the lies, and now I know them as gaslighting, the things that were coming at me, I didn't understand them at all. So I had just gone through this horrific divorce without a label, without understanding, just really confused as to what the heck happened. And I went into a rather quick relationship after that. I was swooped up by another narcissist, only this one was the reason I came to learn all about this. He had me arrested falsely, which is something that happens a lot with victims, because a narcissist will revert to anything that will kind of take you out of the way, get you out of their hair, and without any care or concern for anyone. So once I started to learn about that, for him, people said, look up gaslighting, he's gaslighting you. I looked it up, and it explained my whole divorce. It explained my mother-in-law, my sister's, my own mother. So there was a reason I didn't see this type of behavior. It was because I grew up with people that would ghost me. And I was used to my sisters just disappearing off the face of the earth for no reason at all. And so when I was in a relationship, that just was like, oh, that's not how normal people are in a relationship. So learning about it and trying to understand it, it put me into this seems like it's a calling for me to stand on a soapbox and never stop talking about it, never stop learning, and never stop teaching about it.
Well, first of all, I just want to congratulate you for not continuing to be in that victim mentality, to see this as a calling, to see this as an opportunity. That's what we really want our entire show to be about, that the divorce and the bad things that happen as a result of divorce are actually opportunities for growth and change. So I'm really, I'm impressed that that's what you see it as, and as a result have obviously helped many, many people. So I want to ask you about the warning signs of narcissists and how you can spot them. But if you could, just before you get to that, just give a little bit of a definition on gaslighting, because I don't know that everyone knows exactly what that is. And you did mention that term. So if you could just give a definition of gaslighting, and then go into what the red flags are for narcissists.
Sure. Gaslighting is a way that they try to manipulate the victim to think they're crazy. That means they're telling you stories that simply didn't happen, and insisting that you're the crazy one, that you don't remember it happening that specific way. So it challenges your mind to really dig deep and question, did that happen? And over time, they slowly wear you down to the point where you are questioning yourself. And most survivors that I talk to just sit there with this dumbfounded look on their faces going, I know that didn't happen, and yet he's convinced me, or she's convinced me over and over, and finally they give up. There's no hope for them, and they just give up the reality that they thought was real, and they've lost themselves. So it feels really icky, if you would say. It feels that you have no control over what's going to happen. And of course, you're walking on eggshells during that, because if you say, no, that's not how I remember it, you'll generally be met with anger. You'll be met with the conflict of the story. And they're telling you, no, this isn't how it is. And you're crazy. How could you believe that? How could you, don't you remember? And it's that kind of wearing down of a person that is their intention. There's a great movie from the 1940s called Gaslighting. And if you haven't seen it, it's really creepy with the old music that they used to play in the background. But the man would actually hide things on his wife and then ask her where her pearl necklace was. And when she would go look for it, she'd be like, oh no, he's going to get so mad at me that I've lost it. But he was like manufacturing this lie, manufacturing her to think that she was crazy. And that's what gaslighting is.
Can I ask, do the narcissists, the people doing the crazy making, coming up with this alternate version of what happened, do they know they're doing it? Is it like is this a plan on their part? I know in that movie, I've seen that movie, and it is fascinating, but that was a very well thought out, plan to make that person think they were going crazy. Do narcissists know what they're doing?
I believe they do, yes, because they're creating this alternate reality. And do they know that they're doing it to mess with your mind? That's to be debated. Do they stick to a story that they believe is true and just push that on? Yes, they do. So I believe that they are doing it intentionally, and there's a maliciousness to it. It's about taking away someone's power. And gaslighting, as all abuse is control. So once they know that they can control you by convincing you of something that didn't happen, then they can control you about every other thing in their life and in your life. So it's a step ladder, if you would, to further and further abuse. If they are not able to mind control you, because that's what gaslighting is, if they're not able to do that, you probably will not be in the relationship very long, because they're looking for someone that they can control. So as soon as you see this reality, which generally happens at the end, at the discard. There's 3 stages of abuse. So it's idealization, and then it's devalue, and after that comes the discard. And most people don't see this kind of behavior until they're out of it, or on the other side looking in going, oh, that's what that was. And so I do believe that they know it and they see it, because it's just, okay, if I can check that box that I got that person to accept this story that I told them, they've got one more step on the control ladder for you.
So back to, I think, Rebecca's question there then. So when someone's getting into a relationship or is in a relationship that's tortured, what are the warning signs or red flags?
Well, there's hundreds of them. There's behavior red flags. There's action red flags. At the beginning, they're certainly different, because the charm that these people have is what captivates everyone. Nobody goes into a relationship going, I want to be with the devil. They just don't. They come into it because the person is everything they've ever dreamed of. And that's part of the red flag kind of abusive behavior, where seems so natural to be sharing your story with the new person in your life, to share every detail that's happened to you before. But what they're doing is they're actually making a list of everything that has happened to you, knowing that they can also get away with it because you didn't see it. So when you're going into a relationship, it's important to know that anyone who rushes intimacy, rushes that relationship. I've heard people get married in 2 months, and it was so whirlwind and it was so amazing. And yet the second they got married, like, the person completely changed. So it's in that stage. If they're not patient with you and not willing to give you the time, that's a sign that they're trying to rush you to confuse you. By rushing someone into something and making them feel so wonderful, on a normal spectrum, that would be a great thing. But on an abusive schedule, that's where they're really just figuring out how to abuse you. And you'll start to see holes in the story. So lies are like gaslighting, lies that just don't make sense. And if they've told you one thing and yet the reality is something else, that's a huge red flag for someone to look at in a relationship. And if they start to isolate you, it's so stealth. You don't really think, oh gosh, he's cutting off my family. But slowly but surely, they pluck off your friends and they go for the weak ones first. When they meet your friends and your family, they're interviewing them too. How is your alliance? How strong are they going to defend and stick up for you? If your family or your friends say, well, she's a very good storyteller, they're going to use that against you later. So they're gathering intel from your friends. And then if your friends and family can be coerced later into becoming what we call flying monkeys, which is kind of like the witch and the Wizard of Oz used the monkeys to do her bidding. That's what flying monkeys are in a narcissistic kind of relationship. But as you're dating and you're interviewing this person, red flags to look for is are there a lot of crazy people in their life? Is their ex a crazy ex? Are they an alcoholic, drug addict? There's a whole list of things that they will, instantly attach to their ex. That's not normal. If everyone in their past is crazy, probably why would they be there? There's something you have to look at. If they experience and display anger towards you for questioning them, they don't like to be questioned. And of course, in the beginning, you're not necessarily questioning. You're believing that love story. You're not going, well, that doesn't make sense. But if you start to question those things, then and they get angry, that's definitely a sign that you have to watch out for. And if you feel like any single fight could end a relationship, then that's not a good feeling either. That's not something that you should be thinking is a good, healthy relationship.
So let's talk about how you started to transform, and come out of that. Because before we got on, I said, so what was the theme, and you said transformation, and how did you come out of that?
Yeah. Well,
And you did take the
yeah,
program, so we should talk about that. But I do want
yeah,
to also talk about how you were able to transform.
yeah. So I was, the the situation that unfolded was really just so crazy. Each separation is different and brutal for every person, but I actually had to deal with housing instability at the same time, as I'm sure a lot of people do. I was fortunate enough to have an apartment here in San Francisco that I was subletting, but there were 3 people that were subletting it and they didn't want to go. And this whole situation erupted with them where the owner of the house tried to evict me, and that triggered a housing an unlawful eviction suit, which I prevailed in the midst of custody. So it was just like so intense, so intense. But having friends that believed me or that were just there to be supportive was the first step. And in the beginning, not everybody really understood what was going on. you know um, in fact, my family didn't really understand it at first. They thought, oh, there's 2 sides, this person will calm down, what have you. But the the truth of the matter was that, you know, even my family was gaslighting me to an extent. It's really hard to understand narcissism unless you've named it and dealt with it. And so yeah, it was actually, so how the YouTube algorithm works. First, it was Dr. Les Carter. And then, once Dr. Les Carter, you watch a few of those videos, then I started being recommended your videos and a few others. And then, yours was about negotiation and more nuanced. And so that was when I was like, oh, the light went off. And I just consumed every video of yours and went back into the archives. And then I found Dr. Ramani. And then there was like, there was the legal and the psychological components of it. And it was just so helpful. It was just like I got everything I possibly could. And then there's another podcast and video series called The Proper Person, which is a guy in Nevada, and he represented himself against a narcissistic co-parent and eventually terminated the narcissist's parental rights because you know, the son's dental health deteriorated at his mom's house, and he had 2 teeth extracted and 5 crowns. And he was able to prove, went to a dentist and did a red coat test and was able to prove that the child wasn't brushing his teeth at the mom's house, leading to this dental problem.
Wow.
So, and then there's also dad surviving divorce. So, there's actually this incredible support community, and, Tina Swithin, One Mom's Battle.
Sure.
So it's like, you take bits and pieces because I agree with some, and identify with some a lot more than others.
Mhm.
But, just to find out that there's this really rich community of narcissism support out there on YouTube was, even if my friends and family didn't get it, there were people that get it, and they could actually, what was the most remarkable thing was like people could actually describe the narcissist in my life, having never met them, because they're so similar. They're all almost identical in the way they behave, their entitlement, their, gaslighting and all these things. So it's like, wow, how could you possibly know this person without knowing this person?
Yeah.
So, watched a
all
lot of
very
YouTube.
similar.
Yeah. I love how you describe them as the chocolate Easter bunny, like
Yeah.
this hollow, really nice looking on the outside and completely hollow on the inside. And so it's just like, wow, when I connected with so many other, and then there's also this guy now, Lee Hammock, Mental Healness, who is
Yeah,
a
I've seen
diagnosed
him.
narcissist. So,
Yeah.
like these are people you do, like yourself, real people, so it's like I've connected with a number of them offline. And so that's like my tribe, my support tribe. And then I've got a great therapist, and, there's other resources for parents here in San Francisco, but it's like, it just is so much energy and so much time to rebuild, And so I really feel for people who've been in a situation for like 20 years and they think, oh, I'm just going to wait till the kids go to college or what have you. And it's like, as hard as this has been, it's been better than being stuck in that situation. And I was only in the situation for 3 years, but wow, that has changed. That's changed me on a cellular level, even in 3 years. So, and I'm finally at the place now of not regretting or blaming myself or shaming myself, and just looking at the lessons and looking at, how much I've grown in the time. But, in the beginning, I was really just like, oh my gosh, I deserve this. This is my life, I'm to blame for this. And, the things I've done have caught up with me. Like, but, now I know it's like every day is an opportunity to transform yourself. And that shaming is part of the internalization of, everything you say will be used against you. Narcissist turns everything you've ever shared, any vulnerability, when you want to connect with them on a human level, they store that up. And then at the most opportune time to damage you, they bring it up and say, well, you did this. And, this is just another example of you doing this. And like, whoa, that's not why I told you that thing. I'm being self-reflective here. I'm being vulnerable. I'm owning, things I've done. And that is totally off limits for you to say that. But, people who are narcissistic, people who are narcissistic feel no shame about, turning that against you. So.
Oh yeah, totally.
Now, when it comes time to get a divorce, people will threaten. People will say things like, you can't ever divorce me, because if you do, I'll make sure you never get a dime. I'll make sure you're out on the street. You're never going to get anything from me. and so people are paralyzed. They're paranoid that they're never going to get anything. And so they end up staying in abusive situations because of that. So, and you know, I know for me, a lot of times as an attorney, I'll say, you know, hey, listen, you know, there are laws around that, especially if you're the non-moneyed spouse. You know, you can many times, if you go to a lawyer, there are protections in the law, you know, where you can potentially get, you know, either fees, you can get support, you can get temporary support, but a lot of times people don't know that. And so what would you say to people around that?
So I think the first thing that people need to do is to seek out a trusted attorney. That's the first thing. I mean, you should, you know, consult several attorneys, speak to other people who have gone through divorces, see who they recommend. Look online and see what kind of reviews an attorney has. Look at their LinkedIn, see what articles they've published, what's their point of view, all of those types of things. And then you need to understand that the law, particularly, I don't know about every state, but I do know it was certainly in New York, the non-moneyed spouse does have the protections that you're talking about, Rebecca. The non-moneyed spouse is going to likely be entitled to what is called pendente lite relief, right? And pendente lite relief, in essence, is temporary relief, temporary support to make sure that you can pay your reasonable expenses, temporary legal fees so that your attorney can get paid, and so that you are essentially on that equal playing field. But you also need to start to pull some documents, right? So you need to, if you can, make sure that you can get hold of your tax returns, make sure that you have bank statements, credit card statements. You know, years ago, I had a client, and I often talk about her because she was really quite intelligent. And what she did was she would essentially go through the garbage, believe it or not. And she would pull all these little bits and pieces of paper. And pretty soon she had what was the beginning of the puzzle, right? And we did all of this discovery in her case, but most of the discovery came from her. So she would find this piece of paper that referred to some account that was offshore. And then we would do the digging. And I remember having her husband in a deposition, and he had revealed zero. I mean zero. His net worth statement, which is something that people fill out at the very beginning of a case in order to, for example, get pendente lite support, but also to create this roadmap, his net worth statement was void of any information. And I remember during the deposition saying to him, how did you expect that I was going to find all of the assets that I have found? And he said, I thought you would just keep doing what you're doing. You would keep subpoenaing, and you would keep digging, and you would keep looking, and then you'll find it. And that became the job. But she herself was very resourceful. And it's important that, as you know, as a spouse, that you look, that you keep your eyes open, that you watch what's happening around you, because you can't live essentially in a shell, right, with everything closed up. You need to keep your eyes open.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing is that you do need to have some stash of cash, because you're going to need to be able to hire that lawyer. And it does take time to get that hearing, to get to that first hearing.
100%.
Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. So look, some people have situations where they're able to turn to family or friends for that first retainer. And that first retainer is essentially, it's that door opening, right? So that you can start to pay an attorney to make the motions or the applications to the court in order to get you that temporary support, those temporary legal fees, to get you set up essentially for the process that is going to occur, right? Where there'll be discovery, where there will be negotiations, and where there may be things like depositions or other court appearances, etc. But you're right. You need to have that door be open. And so you either need to put aside cash and open a bank account so that you can, over time, essentially save up for your retainer, or at least be honest with friends or family and say, look, I'm going to need some help here. I might need to take a loan. I might need to sign a promissory note to you so that I can get myself on my feet again, and maybe help my children as well, because it may be that your spouse is not, giving you sufficient funds to pay not only for your support, but also for your children's support.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about the 11 sneaky things that narcissists do in divorce. So, first of all, before we get to that, you need to understand something about narcissists. And that is that with a narcissist, you're either for them or against them. And if they find out that you're against them, once you're into that discard phase, then you become public enemy number one. And now they need to take you down. And the other thing that you need to understand is that they get narcissistic supply from jerking you around. So while you might think, what is it that they want? I'll just give it to them. What they want is to jerk you around. They get supply from that. And so when you just say, I'll just give it to them, what you're basically saying is, I want this over. And if you're trying to make it be over, then you're trying to say, I'm going to take away a source of supply from them, which they don't want to happen. Get it? So that's why that option of just giving them whatever it is that they want and walking away is really an illusion. It's a trick, because they will constantly move goalposts and do all sorts of things because they get supply from jerking you around and intimidating you and, making the process a nightmare for you. So that's why you have to kind of approach it from a different angle. And that's what I teach you in my S.L.A.Y methodology, which stands for strategy and leverage and anticipating and focusing on you. So remember, they're difficult people anyway. They thrive on conflict anyway, even in regular life. And so when you're dealing with it in a divorce situation, you are now dealing with whoever they were on a regular basis, but on steroids. They're like 50,000 times worse. So they want to take you down before you can take them down. They want to expose you and make you look bad before you can make them look bad. It becomes this massive, huge game to them. All right. So what kinds of things do they do? Well, I mean, it ain't good. Let's just say that. But let's go through a few of their favorites. Number one is they will lie. They're going to lie about anything. They're going to lie about everything. They're going to lie about stuff they don't even need to lie about. They're going to lie about stuff that's readily verifiable. You will be saying to yourself, how are they getting away with this? And the thing that I want you to remember is that the only person that can hold them accountable is the judge. No one else. There's no, magical fairies that come out or stormtroopers that come out in your living room that go, hey, you're not supposed to do that. So, when you say, how are they getting away with this? You have to remember, okay, well, who can hold this person accountable? Only the judge. And how do you get the judge to hold this person accountable? Well, you do that through filing a motion and setting it for hearing or something like that. So the only other way other than that you can get them to do something that you want them to do is through actually creating leverage and letting them feel threatened, letting them feel like they're going to be exposed in some way in the negotiation process. But anyway, I'm digressing. Anyway, here we are. So they will lie. They're going to lie. They're going to lie in motions. They're going to lie in pleadings. They're going to lie in depositions. They're going to lie to the court. They're going to lie to the lawyers. They're going to lie to mediators. They're going to lie about everything. Don't be surprised when they lie. Just like, oh, yeah, there they are lying, and then use it to your advantage. You can use it to your advantage. When they go and lie like that, you're going to go, yay, thank you. Thank you very much, because that will become part of your leverage. Got it? All right. And by the way, if you know that they are big, fat, hairy liars, give me a total liars in the comments right now. All right. Ready for number two? Number two is they will obstruct. They will withhold information. They will not give you the financial documents that they're supposed to, or they'll give you some of them, or they'll give you all the months except July. It's so annoying, but that's what they will do. I know it's crazy, but you know, they just do that just to annoy you or to withhold information or to try to hide information, or they want to make you work for it and they want it to cost you more money. So that's number 2. Number 3 is they will manipulate text messages, emails. I've seen people, you know, where the narcissist will send a confirmation email for an agreement that, you know, obviously didn't take place. So annoying, right? They will twist everything you do or say. All right. And I want you to remember that everything you put your hand to is a potential trial exhibit. So if you don't want to see it again, do not hit send, do not push post or whatever it is. And if you want more on how to respond powerfully to text messages, definitely check out my video on kick-ass responses to narcissist texts for sure. All right. Ready? Number 4 sneaky things narcissists do in divorce is they use threats and intimidation tactics. They're going to say things they want to trigger you. They know how to trigger you. So they're going to say things like, you're never going to see your kids again. I'm going to put you in jail. I'm going to accuse you of this. I'm going to make sure that you have no money and you're living on the streets. They know what your worst fears are, so they push on those. They want to trigger you. All right, just don't fall into that. I mean, most of the time when, you know, I was talking to clients on a regular basis, I would be spending a lot of my time dispelling myth. 95% of the time, their threats are just a bunch of crap. Just remember that. All right, number 5. Line up flying monkeys. Oh, yes, especially the coverts. You know how they love them, some flying monkeys. Yes, they do. And they love to fly, get those flying monkeys to believe all of their lies and you know how great they are and how horrible you are and smear you. You know, it's part of the whole smear campaign thing. And I do have a whole video on how to shut down a narcissist smear campaign. If you want to check that out, you can. Number 6 is they will use the court system as a sword, you know, file all kinds of stuff, which leads me to number 7, which is they will file unnecessary motions. You know, this is part of using the court system as the sword. They will just file all kinds of stuff to drive you absolutely insane and make sure you're spending lots of money and you're always on the defense and you feel like you're a turtle on your back with their foot on you, right? Number 8, they will use children as pawns. This is the one that's like super sad, and I'm sorry to hear all the time, and I'm sorry to see when it happens, because that's, you know, the children are innocent victims in this, and they are not thinking about what's in the best interest of the children when they do that. So that's number 8. Number 9 is that they will hide money and assets. A lot of times they've been doing that for a long time, even before the divorce started, or they will move things, or they'll put things in other people's names, or they will take cash and put it in different places, or they'll put cash with someone that they trust. Cash is hard to track down. But most of the time, other monies are not as hard to track down. And a lot of times, by the way, there's not as much hidden money as you might think. You become so paranoid because they've done so much to you that you think that it's a lot worse than it is. So hopefully that makes you feel better. Next one is number 10. Number 10 is that they will ignore court orders. And again, this is where you're going to be saying, how are they getting away with this? And again, it's like, if they do that, let's say they're ordered to produce a document by a certain date, according to the court. Or let me give you a different one. Let me say that they're supposed to pay child support on the 1st of the month, and now it's the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th of the month, and it hasn't been paid. And you're sitting in your house going, how are they getting away with this? I want you to think that through, because the reason they got away with it so far at that point was because no one would know about it that needs to know about it, because the only person that needs to know about that is the judge. So when they ignore court orders, you need to file something to let the judge know that they ignored the court order. You know, whether it's a motion for contempt or a motion to compel or a show cause to, you know, should they be held in contempt, something, you know, whatever needs to be filed in your particular court. And sometimes there's different languaging in different courts, but if they do that, you just need to let the courts know. Don't let them get away with it. Even if you file whatever you need to file and the hearing doesn't get set for 3 months or whatever, don't let them get away with it. You have to stay on them. You are conditioning them on how to treat you. So that's number 10. You ready for number 11? This is the last one. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, by the way. I'm quite sure that all of you guys are going to say that there's lots more. And you can definitely go ahead and comment below other ones that you've seen too. All right, ready for number 11? Number 11 is stalking, threats of violence, actual violence. Just remember that everything that you do or say can be used against you and probably will be if you are dealing with a narcissist. Unfortunately, as I said, they're big, fat, hairy liars.
You're getting ready to divorce a narcissist. Maybe you're in the process of divorcing a narcissist, and you're scared to death that the narcissist is going to use the court system as a sword. Or what does that even mean, that they use the court system as a sword? When they go to divorce, they are now in what we call the discard phase. And if you want to know about the 3 different phases of a narcissistic relationship, which is love bomb, devalue, and discard, check out my videos on love bombing, devaluing, and discarding. But once you get into the discard phase, it's really the birth of the smear campaign. They can start this process months and months and months before the divorce has even been filed. You know, they just start dropping these little breadcrumbs around to their flying monkeys or to the other people that they want to line up to be on their side, because they're just starting to plant these little seeds that there's something wrong with you. So, for example, they'll say, you know, Mary had a little too much to drink at the party, and they say that like 6 months before the divorce was even filed, because they're kind of starting to see the writing on the wall. And so they just start to say these little things like, oh, I'm kind of worried about her. You know, they put it in this terms of, oh, I'm so worried about that person. And then, boom, once the divorce starts, they are now suddenly asking for sole custody or supervised time sharing, or they want a custody evaluation, something like that. And it's like the craziest thing. You know, so I have a situation like that right now with one of my clients. My client is the husband, and the two of them are in the same exact profession, and they even own the business together. They have 3 children together. They have shared custody. I mean, you know, even when they were still married, they shared responsibilities. Both of them were taking the children to various sports events. Both of them were making dinner for the children. Both of them were helping with homework. Both of them were equally involved in the children's lives. So I crazily thought, oh, we'll start this case and it'll be no problem. Since they're in the same profession, we're just going to be drafting a marital settlement agreement. I'm sure it'll just be 50-50 custody. There won't be any alimony issues. But no, she goes and hires a lawyer that likes to help people use the court system as a sword and weaponize the court system. And suddenly the woman, the wife, filed a motion for a custody evaluation, and now all of a sudden she's withholding time sharing from my client. All of a sudden, when the case starts, he's a terrible parent. He beats the children. He does all of these things. Meanwhile, right up until the day that she filed the petition, they were sharing all the responsibilities for the child. But now here she is using the court system as her sword, weaponizing the court system to gain leverage over my client, to show that she's the one in control, to show that she's the one with the power, to show that she's the one that can make him squirm. Because remember, narcissists need an endless amount of supply. Supply is their food source, their oxygen, it's what they live on. So they get supply from jerking people around. It sounds like the craziest thing. When you're going to try to resolve a case, a divorce case, or any kind of issue, any kind of dispute with a narcissist, and you are a reasonable person, you are not on the same page, because that narcissist is not looking for an ending of the situation. The narcissist is looking for a way to continue to jerk you around. So while you're going, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why are we throwing all this money at this situation? Well, the reason why is because they are enjoying the process. They'll tell you that they aren't. They'll tell you it's your fault that it's taking so long. They'll tell you that you are the reason that they had to do all these things, because they had to save their children by asking for sole custody, or save their children for asking for supervised time sharing. But that's not what they really want to do. What they really want to do is jerk you around. I've actually had clients where they were the ones who were the narcissists tell me, I'd rather pay you than her. I'd rather keep the lawyer working and doing things to make the other person miserable than to actually resolve the case. Sounds crazy, but it's not crazy when you know what the motivation is behind it. And if you don't want this to happen to you, I want to see an I'm fighting back in the comments. If you are dealing with this and you're seeing this narcissist using the court system as a sword, or you think that they're going to be using the court system as a sword, there's only one way to get back at this, and that is to shift the dynamic, turn the tables, because you're going to feel like you're being pelleted with ammunition all over the place. They're going to use every single thing they can in their arsenal to make your life as miserable as possible. So you're just going to be sitting there defending. It's like you're trying to get yourself out of a paper bag. So the only thing you can do is use my S.L.A.Y method, which of course I have a whole course on slay your negotiation with a narcissist, but understand that S.L.A.Y stands for strategy, leverage, anticipating what the narcissist is going to do, and focusing on you and your case. And that's the only way you're going to do it, and you need to go on the offensive. And maybe even use the court system as your own sword, but in a way that ethically manipulates the manipulator, in a way that makes them think that you are potentially going to be interrupting their source of supply, so that they feel threatened, because the only way that you're going to get them to stop using the court system as their weapon, as their sword to make you crazy and use it as a form of getting supply for themselves, is by fighting back, is by going on the offensive, is by threatening their source of supply, by saying, okay, potentially you're going to look bad if you do this, that, or the other thing. Creating leverage against them. You know, inside my course, I give like 30 different examples of leverage, because that's like so important. I also have a whole video on it. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you check out my video on how to create leverage and what is leverage when you're dealing with a narcissist. And we'll drop a link to that below as well. The main thing that you need to remember is they will use the court system as their sword, as a weapon, as a means to make you crazy. Just expect it. Don't be surprised when they do that. But you need to have a plan of attack, a plan to fight back, a plan that has you controlling the process instead of them. Now, let's talk about how to prepare yourself financially for a divorce. If you are getting ready to go through a divorce, it's different to prepare financially if you are what we call the moneyed spouse or the non-moneyed spouse. The moneyed spouse is usually the one who is making more money, and very oftentimes the moneyed spouse is the one who has more control over the finances. Sometimes it's not necessarily that way. Sometimes you see the person making the money and then the other person who hasn't been making as much is the one who has been paying the bills and in control of the finances. But a lot of times what you see is the moneyed spouse also usually has control over the actual money. So if you are the non-moneyed spouse or the person who doesn't have control over the finances, it's really even more important for you to prepare yourself financially for divorce. And if you are getting ready to divorce a narcissist or anybody, make sure you check out my video on before you divorce a narcissist. Watch this, because that will give you tons more information. If you are getting ready to divorce a narcissist or anybody, and you're in it to win it, give me a "in it to win it" in the comments. Regardless of who you are, whether you're the moneyed spouse or the non-moneyed spouse, the very first thing you're going to want to do is gather your financial documents. So when you go to file for divorce, and once the divorce is filed, regardless of where you are, you will have to disclose information about your finances. So generally, that means a couple of years of tax returns, several months of bank statements, credit card statements, savings accounts and checking accounts for both personal and business. It also means credit card statements for both personal and business, and it usually means any kind of prenuptial agreements, deeds for real estate, retirement account statements, pay stubs, the way that you've been paid, whether it's maybe it's a 1099 or maybe it's a W-2 or maybe it's a K-1, but you will need to be able to have access to all of that information, or actually copies of all of that information. Your lawyer will need that. And for how long will you need it for? I mean, at least several months worth of financial statements for banks and credit cards, probably at least a couple of years of income information for your tax returns, and then at least a couple of months of statements for current pay stubs, things of that nature. So that's number one, is gathering your financial information. Sometimes if you're the non-money spouse, it can be kind of hard to get access to that. Don't beat yourself up over it. If you can't get access to it, then it will have to be disclosed anyway once the case gets started, but it's a little bit easier for your lawyer if you've already got that information, because now that avoids having to send out requests to produce, and then if the other person doesn't produce the documents, then your lawyer now has to file some kind of motion to compel the information to be disclosed to you. So I would just say the more you can get your hands on, the better it is. I actually had a client one time who would just get little bits and pieces, and she would just drop it off at my office, and she did that for like 2 years before we actually even started the divorce. But that's what she did. And so gathering your financial information is going to be really, really important. Number two is going to be understanding your lifestyle and tracking your expenses. So if there's going to be any kind of a claim with regard to alimony or support, or maybe even child support or something like that, lifestyle and monthly expenses may end up being an issue. So it's really good if you have a really good understanding of how much you've been spending monthly on anything, including mortgage, taxes, insurance, electricity, utilities, cell phones, but also dining out, insurances, pet expenses, grooming, gifts for people, any kind of children's expenses, tuition, lunches, anything that you're spending for the children. extracurricular activities, things like that. So make sure you have a really good understanding, if you can, of what the lifestyle has been, because that will also help you as well. Sometimes people need to hire forensic accountants for lifestyle analysis, and if you've already done the work, it will save you lots and lots of money. Number 3 is having access to cash, because especially if you are the non-moneyed spouse, yes, your lawyer can potentially file something for you to get some sort of support for you on a temporary basis and going forward. And yes, maybe your spouse will continue to deposit their paycheck into the joint account or let you have access to credit cards and things like that. But they may not. They may cut off your access to that. And yes, your lawyer can file something that orders the court, where the judge will order the narcissist or whoever the other person is to continue to pay for those things for you and can you continue to give you access to those things. But in the meantime, while they've cut you off, your lawyer has to file the motion, get the hearing time, get in front of the judge, get the judge to give a ruling, and all that time you're trying to live. And how are you going to? So if you can, ideally, it would be better if you have at least a few months worth of cash that you have access to, that you have sole control over, and also enough to hire a lawyer if possible. If you don't have a way to save it up for yourself, maybe you can call upon family members or friends to get a loan for you so that until your lawyer can go and get that money back from the spouse, from a court hearing, that you take it out in loans. And obviously there's no guarantee that you can get it back, but that is something that you will want to talk to your attorney about. But in the meantime, if you can get access to having enough cash to get you going for a few months, and also hire an attorney, that would be the ideal situation. The last thing is just prepare yourself and your documents in making sure that your any trust documents or wills or anything like that state what you want them to say, because once you get going with the divorce, you may or may not be allowed to change beneficiaries or change what is in your trust documents or your wills or things like that, or beneficiaries on IRAs, because sometimes, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, there may be a standing order issued that gets issued. It's an order of the court that gets issued as soon as the divorce is filed, which precludes people from making big changes. So, it will preclude you from also putting the house on the market or doing anything like that unless you agree to putting it on the market or making these big changes. So if there are changes that you want to make, you should probably talk to your lawyer, but those are the kinds of things that you're going to want to do prior to the divorce being filed.
So Dr. Ramani, how about let's bring you in on this and what's going on psychologically with a narcissist during a divorce.
I mean, listen, it comes down to, a narcissist is actually the most extraordinarily easy human being to understand. It's interesting to me how everyone's befuddled by them. They're actually more easy to understand than me, because I'm actually motivated by lots of complicated things. So understanding someone who's healthy is challenging. Understanding someone who's narcissistic is actually like trying to understand a rat in the maze. As long as you can, and you've called it leverage, I think it goes beyond that though. I mean, at the end of the day, the narcissist is motivated by protecting their own insecurity. That's what it is for them. They feel chronically, strangely, we feel unsafe with them. Well, that's a projection. They chronically feel threatened by the world. They chronically feel unsafe. So all of these defenses, the arrogance, the entitlement, the grandiosity, all of it is designed to protect their fragile egos. And in that quest, the best tool for that is narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply comes from two paths. Path number one is the traditional validation. Tell me I'm great. Tell me I'm wonderful. Tell me what a great guy I am. Tell me how successful I am. Look at my big house. Look at my big car. Look at my big this. Look at my big that. That's path one. But we forget that the second path of narcissistic supply is conflict. They really, really enjoy their ability to intimidate oppress and bully other people. What does it do? It gives them, just like the playground bully, a false sense of strength that protects that insecurity. So it really is very easy to understand them. I think what throws people off is that they think narcissistic supply is only the good stuff, the really big ticket validating stuff, like you're so great, look at my big car. The other side of it, though, that they kind of enjoy conflict. It's always about the win for them, but ultimately the win is one more source of supply. So it's really the clearest lens to view all of this through. And when we realize narcissistic supply is actually a complex space, that also makes this a bit easier, as it were, to understand. And I think the challenge is, even as I hear Tina's story, you and I have talked about cases on both of our ends, is that obviously once you're in it and there's high stakes, there's children, there's material issues like, supports and financial issues and all of that, it starts getting challenging, especially if you're beholden to them. And anyone who's in a joint custody situation is beholden to them because they want to keep their children safe. And so, but that's really what the motivator is. I mean, it really is. They care very much about what the world thinks of them. Again, why? Because they're insecure. Secure people, I don't care what anyone thinks of me. I mean, I don't think I've changed my sweatpants in 3 days. Like, I don't care. Now everybody knows, it's the not caring. And they care so desperately. So even while they're contemptuous of other people, contemptuous of their relationships, honestly, they're contemptuous of them because it's a defense, because they need their approval so much. So actually very easy to understand. Rats in a maze. That's it. Rats in a maze.
Yeah, but then the way that it manifests itself is just heinous, and especially
It's absolutely heinous. As all insecure people, the most insecure people in our midst are often the most dangerous, because they're going to do anything to protect their insecurity. So it is heinous, absolutely.
yeah, and especially in a divorce, because they just have this incredible need for self-preservation, and it's like they're the fight of their life. I mean, they're in this massive survival mode, but then their target is also in survival mode, because they know they're under attack, they're under siege, and they're under siege in a way from this person. And this is what I always say the divorce paradox is, which is during the worst, most horrible and traumatic time of your life. I mean, if you look at any polls on what's the most traumatic thing that humans can deal with, it's always death and divorce are at the top. And I think prison is in there somewhere, but prison's actually lower than divorce. Like, people would rather be in prison than get a divorce. But during the worst, most traumatic time of your life, you have to make the most critical decisions of your life. And so you're under siege, and it's bad enough when you're divorcing normally, but then when you add on the layer of divorcing a narcissist, now you're trying to make decisions about your money, your home, your children, all the things that mean the most to you, your business, potentially. While you're under siege, and while you're trying to heal yourself. I mean, people who've been in narcissistic relationships for long periods of time are like PTSD. I mean, they're seriously, traumatized, and they're trying to make decisions. So, for example, this woman I spoke to this morning, she wants to change her custody arrangement. She said that, when she entered into the custody agreement at the time, she was so terrorized by him. She just wanted to get out of it. She just wanted to be done. And so she agreed to stuff that she didn't want, now she regrets, So what I'd like to hear from Tina is, how did you keep your mindset strong? How were you able to keep going and not give up and keep yourself healthy?
It was a process. The first few years, had I not been journaling and blogging about it, if I were to look back, I remember very little of it. I feel like I was operating in a state of trauma and shock and emotions. And for me, it was a few years into it before I started going to sit in the courtroom. And it was a way for me to learn about the process and how attorneys handle things and how different case law. And I became a fixture in the courtroom on days that it had nothing to do with me. And just there as an observer, because it allowed, first for me to desensitize myself, because it just became part of my so then walking into the courtroom when it was my own case, I was much stronger. And I was educated on what was going on, and the motions that I was filing. And I didn't get it right all the time, but it helped tremendously. And what I learned is that so much of it is about strategy, and judges and
Yeah.
attorneys, anybody in those courtrooms, they don't want to see your emotions. That was one of the things I learned quickly is I would walk to the bathroom in the courthouse and have a panic attack or vomit or break down crying. But when I walked through those doors, I had to, put my shoulders back and my head up, and, almost role play was kind of the
Yeah.
mentality I had to have. But, and just forming alliances when I would be in the courtroom and I would see another parent who I could, identify as the healthy parent in the situation, I'd follow them out into the hallway and say, here's my card. Sounds crazy. I'd love to go to coffee with you because we have a lot in common. And that started building my local team. So those were some of the things that I did in the beginning. And from day one, I remember people telling me, this is a 50-50 state. California, I think every state is 50-50 at this point. And that's, truly what you just have to accept that. And I refused. I couldn't even grasp how somebody could, some people, it's truly, their exes are so good at impression management that may be in the cards for them. And then you're forced to accept radical acceptance, managing your expectations, that whole thing. But for me, I couldn't accept that was what was best for my kids. And that was the mentality I kept moving me forward, and really celebrating the little victories, which I consider to be anytime my kids are a little bit safer. And that just kept the momentum going until I think it was about year 6 that we were assigned a custody evaluator, and he really understood what I was up against. And his orders or his recommendation to the court were unlike anything I've ever heard of before. And it was so strict. And the judge ended up saying, I'm not going to adopt all of these because I don't want to micromanage this guy. But the ultimate ruling on year 6 was permanent supervised visits. So he could never again be alone. And the judge said, I intend for these to be final custody orders, which was huge. But as we know, a narcissist can't handle that. Their ego doesn't want someone supervising them. That's a huge threat. And so he jumped ship, and we didn't hear from him for a year and a half. But that was a year and a half of peace. And I was fantastic. So it's those baby steps. It's, what, today my kids are a little bit safer, and that kept me going. And when I did, there were so many times where I threw myself a huge pity party when I got slammed in court, and I just always set an end time. I can allow myself a day or two to be mad or angry because it's warranted. But then, Friday, I'm going to dust myself off and I'm going to try again because my kids need me. There's no one else that's going to fight for them.
Absolutely. I just want to inject a little bit of the legal side of some of the things that you just said. And one is that, yeah, there is a kind of unspoken presumption, I'll call it, for this 50-50 thing right now in most of the states. I think there are a couple of holdouts. I think New York doesn't quite have that presumption yet, but it's not necessarily a legal presumption, meaning a legal presumption would mean that when the court sits down, when the judge sits down, then they're going to presume that this is what it's going to be. And then the other person who doesn't want that has the burden of proving why it shouldn't be that. So that would be a legal presumption. So it's not necessarily a legal presumption in a lot of the states, but it's kind of like an unspoken presumption. And so what I want people to remember is that what the real presumption is and should always be is best interest of the child. And I just had a situation with this with the judge back in January. I was at a hearing, and the judge, the baby at the time was maybe 5 months old or something like that. And the judge was like, well, you know, you guys are coming to trial in May. So, you know, don't bother coming in here if, you know that it's going to be 50-50 and whatever. And I'm like, really, Your Honor, before you even hear one word about what's in the best interest of this child, you know that there's 18 factors in the statute that you're supposed to consider. So if you're making a decision right here and now, then that's grounds for your recusal. And so, you know, right away, he's like, oh, of course, we have to, you know, consider the factors. And, you know, and of course, he backpedaled right away. But, you know, I want people to understand that, yes, it's that, but don't just give up on that. Don't just say that's what it is and be resigned to that. Remind the court, remind the judge, remind everybody you can that the standard is best interest of the child. And there is, I'm sure, a statute in every single state that has, you know, the factors that have to be considered by the court. So don't just like resign yourself to that's what it's going to be. So
Rebecca, I have a comment on that though, because despite that, the best interest of the child, you know, anyone who's, you know, doing advocacy work, mental health work, you've been in the divorce space, in almost all of these cases, I'm not willing to hazard a guess that 75 to 90% of these cases, they're not taking into account the best interest of the child. And these statutes and these 18 points and all this stuff can exist. And in that particular case, it might have even been easier because it was a 5-month-old baby. But when I am seeing over and over and over again is cases where there is no way on planet Earth that the best interest of this child is being accounted for. So even if that's written into the law, and I suppose, yes, it becomes one more grounds of which an attorney could attempt to push the point, I still feel like most judges are going to reject that out of hand because they still feel like the argument of a parent that's antagonistic and toxic and undermining and invalidating and alienating and all the things that they are, is that they're going to say there's no evidence of that. You know, I mean, the evidence that you'd have to show that it's not in the best interest of the child is often quite physical. Like you lived 20,000 miles from the kid's school, or you travel 3 weeks a month. They'll run with that. But these subtle psychological factors, which I don't even think are subtle, I am not seeing a judge in America account for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difficulty, right? Because it's like, it is so subtle and the judges are always looking for the easy way out.
Yes.
I mean, and so it is difficult. So what you have to do is you have to be able to present a case in such a way that they can't look away. And you can't go in and say the person's a narcissist or, you know, accuse them of any kind of something like that that's not readily supportable, you know, because that's when you're going to lose your own credibility, even if the person is the most flaming narcissist on the planet. So you have to go in with, you know, reams of supporting documentation as to what's in the best interest of the child. I mean, Tina's nodding her head because, you know, you figured it out. And I'm really amazed and give you such props that you were able to go in there and think of the idea of, I'm going to go watch other court proceedings and figure it out. You know, so talk more about like how you were able to do that, because, you know, there's so many people out there who can't afford a good lawyer, who can't afford, you know, a therapist. They can't afford anything. They're like, you know, you were talking about going to the food pantry or whatever. I mean, if it's like eating versus an attorney, you're going to pick eating. So talk more about that.
So, you know, I know one of the things I talk to parents all the time who will tell me, you know, I don't have time to go sit in the courtroom. You know, I tell them, you don't have time not to. I was working full time. You know, one of the things I didn't mention, when I left my marriage, you know, just so people don't, you know, go, well, you know, she has all these resources or whatnot. I left with $178 to my name, not a penny in retirement, not a penny in, you know, any type of account, literally under $200. And I was working full time. I had 2 little girls in preschool. The cost of preschool is insane when you've got 2 little ones. But I made that a priority. And, you know, however you have to do it, for me, that was the number one, you know, that was the best thing I could have ever done. It gave me so much insight into things attorneys used. And then I would go, you know what? And a lot of people, so, you know, how did you win based on him being a narcissist? I've never used that word. I've written 4 books on the topic, but I've never used that word narcissist to anybody. You know, I focused on his patterns of behavior that were affecting my kids.
Exactly.
And, you know, and pain, you know, seeing, and one thing I don't think people understand, if I were in courtroom A, I would present my case, my exact case, one way. But if I were in courtroom B, just based on what I know about that judge, I would present my case completely different, because they're human. They bring in their own biases and
they do.
personal. You know, there's a judge down in Southern California who lost a child to a drug overdose. So she takes addiction issues very seriously. My ex-husband was an alcoholic. So you better believe I would hit heavy on the alcoholism in her courtroom. And I think people don't give that, you know, there's no rule book for any of this. And,
It's
you
so
know,
smart. So
So
smart.
smart. So smart.
thank you. So, you know, so much of it was learning, you know, so many learning lessons. And when I was in the hallways of the courtroom on break, I would make conversations with every attorney that would talk to me, and, you know, and so you share my story. I couldn't afford their consults, but if they're bored sitting in the hallway, I would use that as an opportunity to introduce myself, let them know. And so many were so helpful to me through this process, you know, just really forming those connections, knowing who every single player is in your system. Every evaluator, you need a notebook of just family court professionals. Anytime you hear something about one of them, or you witness an evaluator testifying in court, or, you know, a minors counsel, write down every detail about them so you can make an informed decision. If you know, if you are going to be assigned an evaluator. I think one of the things I was so naive about in the beginning, I was desperate for someone to listen to me. And so I would show up in court and I would beg, you know, appoint minors counsel, appoint an evaluator. Somebody's got to see what's happening. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have said, you know, here are my 3 selections for an evaluator. I don't care which anybody can choose from this list.
That's what
but
I
I
do.
would, yeah, exactly. And then it gives the other side the power and control that they need to make that decision. But like in my case, the minors counsel who was appointed, because I didn't know anything about him, he turned out to be a bigger narcissist than
Oh,
than my ex-husband in a lot of ways. And so it was a complete waste of time and energy and resources. And so really entrenching yourself in your system and learning the ropes and the people, you have to do it.
that's such great advice. Really, really great advice. You know, as you were talking, I was wondering if one of the other things that you did, because if you did, this would be a great idea. You know, if you know that there are particularly good lawyers or lawyers who understand, you know, what you're dealing with, you know, pleadings are actually public information. So did you go to the clerk and read motions and look at stuff that other lawyers had filed?
So if I saw a case that closely resembled my case, I would take down their names and go find them, because in our court, we're pretty archaic. We have like you have to get these little slides and you
Oh,
look at
okay.
all at the microfiche. And so I would go pull people's cases and just sit there and go through their whole case from
That's
start
what I
to
was wondering.
finish.
Yeah. That's exactly
Yeah.
what I was wondering that you did. Yeah. So that's so smart. Really, really smart. But of course, very time consuming,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, so Dr. Romani, what would be, you know, ways that people can kind of self-care and cope during this process?
You know, Tina, what is so striking about what you just said, and you know, just so everyone knows, Tina is actually literally one of my favorite people on the planet, and she knows that too.
Aw.
So I really, you know, I mean, I know the depth of her story is that, you know, what's striking to anyone hearing this is that, and what I see in many of the clients I work with is that they get exhausted. They go to a place of full-on helplessness, hopelessness, and powerlessness, which are often some of the last stops on the train before full-blown major depression and anxiety disorders and all of that, like really major psychological and psychiatric, you know, fallout from this. And as a result, the persistence you showed, Tina, is remarkable because, and what I love about what you did, Tina, was you weren't trying to control things you can control, namely judges who didn't get it, custody evaluators who didn't get it, court systems who didn't get it. You weren't trying to control those mechanisms. You were trying to learn about them. And of all the guidance I've ever heard, because you feel so powerless, give yourself the time to learn. Look up the cases, learn what happened in those cases, learn about the judges. I mean, I think that anytime we can give a person a sense of control, that's something they can actually do, is really, really important. But I do have to say, Tina, there's a unique resilience that you're manifesting, because I do think for people, the day in and day out, the demoralization, and no matter how much evidence they present to the court, it feels like no matter what, it's not working out their way, to the point where I've seen children who are, you know, being forced to co-reside, you know, and have custody with the more narcissistic parent, to the incredible detriment of the child's mental health. And the mother can't even make the argument in this case that really it is exposure to this toxic parent. I mean, he has completely worked that whole system beautifully. So to your question though, Rebecca, number one, I would say it's absolutely critical you reach out not only for therapy with somebody who gets narcissistic abuse. And I'm really put that point on it, because many, many times I actually don't think that clients in this space should be entirely targeted as though they have post-traumatic stress disorder. I think PTSD is a very different kind of phenomenology. And while addressing early traumas and all of that may be an issue, I think that there's something rather unique about the narcissistic abuse space, because it moves pretty quickly when a person gets lots of education. Because I am shocked in 4 to 6 sessions when a client really is helped to understand what happened, how their own early, you know, their family of origin issues connect, and they see it, they're like, that's it. Like, I'm good. Thank you. I'm not a crazy person. Thank you. That's not how treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder
That is
works.
so good.
Yeah, it's very, very different. And now, are there many, many people out there who experience issues in their experience of a narcissistic divorce? Physical violence, sexual violence, severe financial deprivation, coercive control, all things that are associated with PTSD? Absolutely. And I do think that is a subset of cases, but I think an even larger subset of cases are people who really are experiencing a more pure version of being absolutely confused by the manipulation. And once they simply get psychoeducation, which is how I got into putting out these YouTube videos, because not everyone could come sit in my office. There's just not even enough hours in the day for me to do that. I wrote books for this reason, thinking if people could get this, they may stop blaming themselves. So it becomes therapy with someone who gets it. Number 2 is also accessing the advocacy community. That is something Tina opened me up to, is that there are people like Tina out there who get it and put resources out in a way from a lived experience perspective. Her Facebook page is a robust resource that I refer all of my clients going through this to, and to her website. So those services exist, you know, basically a support group mechanism of people who get it. But then beyond that, I really, really do tell people is that you are not defined by this experience. I actually think that survivors of narcissistic abuse who really then take this as a jumping off point, to the degree we're talking about it being a trauma, what I really do see is tremendous post-traumatic growth. People saying, I can see these people coming from a mile away. I am actually going to be a lot more careful in my relationships. I am getting rid of the people in my life who are not good for me. They actually do a whole like clean out, like a toxic dump. They
So
just,
good.
they knock everyone out because they're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And they realize how many people in their midst were the enablers of the narcissistic abuse. And through a good support network, therapy, advocacy, support groups, you get people who say, it's okay. It's okay to remove people from your life, because they'll get a lot of guilt. Like, how dare you not speak to this one? How dare you do you. And so it's very much it's a process of healing, which I've got to tell you, I have seen many, many people soar. They go back to school, they take on the careers they thought they wouldn't, they travel, they feel like better parents. I mean, they really do come out of it. But all of that said, it really is a daily practice. Things like mindfulness, meditation, getting also treatment for other disorders that may have come up or gotten exacerbated, anxiety disorders, depression, substance use disorders that can sometimes flare up in the face of all of this. It's about taking care of you. And also keep in mind, Rebecca and Tina, you know this very well, is that people who've been through a narcissistic divorce or a long period of narcissistic abuse in their lives, self-care for themselves is the first thing they threw out. They stop taking care of themselves. They'll often start eating more poorly, gaining weight, making themselves at risk for things like diabetes. They don't get their regular healthcare appointments. They don't take care of themselves because in some ways, staying in a narcissistically abusive relationship is so sort of self-harming that you're on like, why would I take care of myself? You know, it's like you're a car, you just drive into the ground at that point. And that awakening of getting out of that relationship is often an awakening that you're this beautiful soul, this beautiful creature that deserves to be taken care of. So it's lots of enlightenment, lots of awakening, lots of education, lots of support, lots of therapy. And again, slowly but surely going into a wiser future.
Yeah, that's such great stuff. Really, really good advice. And you know, I just want to add in as far as like the legal perspective on this. Something that people can do is, you know, maybe if you can't afford to have a lawyer for the entire process, but maybe have a consulting lawyer, you know, maybe somebody that you'd be willing to, you know, if you have a little bit of money, you could go in and just make sure that, you know, kind of like what Tina did when she was sort of having these hallway conversations. But, you know, if you wanted to have somebody who was, you know, taking a look at an agreement and maybe just reviewing an agreement for you and just spending an hour of their time doing that, you know, something, you know, where you get a little bit of that legal protection if you can afford to have even that. You know, obviously I have a program for that as well for people. And, you know, but if there's a way that you can access some help, that's I think really, really helpful for people to have access to that.